All right. Hello, everyone. As always, I will call your attention to the front of the room if you're here in person or on Zoom. Welcome to everyone who's tuning in. We've got a room, we've got some people in the room, and we have people on the Zoom. Thank you, however you are joining us. We're glad to have you. There will probably be some people trickle in as we get started, both digitally and in person, so welcome to one and all. Put a message in the chat just to make sure on Zoom that everyone can hear me okay, and let us know where you're tuning in from. It's always interesting to see who's tuning in from where, especially at 4 p.m. on a Monday. Thank you for sharing your afternoon with us. We're excited today to be launching Moments in Time. We made up our own word for the French title of the game, Intentporels. My colleague, Julien, and another decided that we might create a neologism in French that would suit the ethos of the game. So thanks for joining us, and I'll get started with a couple of housekeeping notes. I also realize I have not yet introduced myself, so let me do so. I'm Jacquelyn Sundberg. I'm the Outreach Librarian for ROAAr. I do a lot of things here, and one of them is work on projects like this one. But I'm also the face that you might have seen at some of our ROAAr events, if you've been to one in the past. So if you've been, welcome back. For those of you who are new, I encourage you to pipe up and chime in the chat. We have someone monitoring it, so if you have trouble or you have comments, you can reach out in the chat. Everyone in the room can hear me? Okay, great. There you go. Thanks for speaking up. I'd like to take a moment to think and be thankful for the place that we're in. For those of you in person with me, here we are on the site of McGill's downtown campus in the McLennan Library building. And this place and McGill's grounds are a place that has long served as a site of meeting and exchange amongst Indigenous nations, including the Kanien'kehá:ka Nation and the Haudenosaunee Confederacy and the Anishinaabe Nations. We honor, recognize, and respect these nations as the traditional stewards of the lands and waters on which our brick and mortar buildings stand today. So I'll get going. The program, I guess, is what's coming up today, is partly celebrating a project, but also celebrating the work of students. So I'm going to tell you a bit of context about the project, and I'm going to pass the microphone to two very talented students, Sam Pappas and Bianca. Thank you to them and to the many students whose time, talent, and work is so much a part of everything we do at the library. Another enormous thank you that I want to start off with is for a person who isn't here today, but for one but for whom this project would never have crossed the finish line, and that's Natalie Cook, who is Associate Dean of ROAAr, when this project began. This project would never have been more than an idea in passing if I hadn't mentioned it to her and she said, yes, go. So here we are a year or so later, and we have a game in front of us. I'll start by saying, yay, we have a card game. It's nice to see it in person, and I will say that every project that crosses the finish line is shepherded by an invisible horde of people, and that crowd of people, I'll mention a few of them by name later on, but they have my thanks. We're delighted to have the game in hand, and some of you might also have it in hand. You can also buy a copy either here in our reading room or at the James bookstore. If you want one, you can buy online via the James bookstore, which is McGill's bookstore. It's a chronological card game, and it's visually stunning. It's a timeline game in which you have to try and place each card in the correct chronological sequence. The first person to correctly place all of their cards wins. Wins the round, sorry. So it actually meets all of my criteria for a game in that it's fast, it's fun, and it's very pretty. So I'm tooting my own horn, but those three principles were some of the guiding ones in our game design. There are more, and you'll hear more about them from Sam when she talks about the research process. But the game is really quick, simple, and very playable. Each moment in time on the cards is illustrated by something from our collections. And you can see a few of them on screen here, and you'll see a few of them, for those of you who are here in person, on display in the reading room, where we've pulled a selection of items that are illustrated and showcased on the cards. This game gave us an interesting way to feature items from across all of our collections, which are very eclectic. We have items from the history of medicine, from natural history, print history, children's books, puppets, pop-ups, and more. There are items that are much more contemporary as well, examples of artist books or fine printing from small presses. There are items that really are fine bindings, fine printings, and more. What is a useful principle to draw things from all of those collections together? Something arbitrary actually works. We experimented with one arbitrary unifying principle in the form of the alphabet. We made a pop-up book that was an alphabet book. So the alphabet, we could choose something from any collection, and it was all tied together by the great unifier of the alphabet. Well, time is a great unifier as well. None of us are free from its ties, and it does tie our collections together. So we used it as the unifying principle of this game. You may be wondering, why did we make a game at all? Well, what is the role of play here at the library? And I have to say, in part, I shoulder the responsibility for that attitude of play and for incorporating play and games here at the library. It's partly to my fault or to my credit, depending on how you see it. So generally, our fourth floor space is a quiet space. It's a reading space, it's a teaching space, and I know that it's not necessarily the first logical fit to have the idea of play or games with that quiet reading space. Games or play would fit better, a more logical place perhaps, in a children's department where it's loud and exuberant and joyful. And I do confess, before I worked at McGill, I worked in the Westmount Public Library's children's department. So I did bring an attitude of play from that department to this one. I even ran the Lego club there for a while. So playing certainly does have a place in the community spirit of what libraries do. Connecting people with each other, with stories, or with resources. Another place that play comes to mind, or might come to mind, is on our computer in the form of video games, perhaps, or on mobile phones. Games are increasingly played on mobile phones. If you're playing games in the library, another place that comes to mind is possibly crossword puzzles, or word searches, or maybe a puzzle table at your local library. All of those are possibly more logical fits than our fourth floor space. They make sense, but they inspire questions. They inspired us to ask questions about how play would fit here at McGill and how play could bring life and learning to our collections on the fourth floor, the special collections, and the larger library collections as a whole. So launching this game, it was the culmination of that interest in play, and we actually put in a grant to the Social Sciences and Humanities Research Council of Canada. And there are a number of projects that have come out of that grant interest in serious play. Play On was funded, got a SSHRC grant, and we started investigating play at the library. I pitched that topic in part because of my background in public libraries, a love of play and language, and games, and their ability to break down barriers and to let people engage with each other and with the collections on a more even playing field. So I'm going to walk through some of the surprising and innovative ways that we found play did fit here at McGill, and particularly through the project that we played our way through in the last couple of years. And at last, the most recent of which you see on screen in moments of time. Speaking of mashups, this one is one of the projects that we created as part of that Play On grant. We started making digital games. This on screen is Amy Redpath-Roddick. Her papers, journals, and correspondences are in the archives here at McGill, and they give interested researchers a unique perspective on Montreal and McGill in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. It's one of 3 online games that we created in the last couple of years, and it's really a juxtaposition. She passed away long before cell phones were the only way or main way to get in touch with people, but here she is, phone in hand, the face of the first digital game we made, Raising Spirits. It's a juxtaposition between old and new, and it's something that marks a lot of the products that we create here, and ROAAr, really the play, lives in the attitude and the ways that you get those elements of old and new to interact with each other and with people, of course. So our collections here are quite literally behind lock and key. For those of you here in person, there are a number of real barriers to getting here from street level. To unlock our collections for a broader public, we chose games as a way of bringing the content out, beyond our walls, beyond the doors. We ventured into the world of game development, and it was an entirely new one for us. For those of you who are joining us remotely, this is our building where we are now. the McLennan Library building, a brutalist wonder. Although it's not quite the same as it is on screen, it's a different season. This photo is from the 1970s, but the building itself hasn't changed a bit. It's exactly the same, although there are probably more spider webs on the outside. But we are up here on the 4th floor, very sparkly, and there are 5 flights of stairs, 5 doors, and a security check-in desk between anyone who might come in from street level to us. It's a real barrier, and we face it when anyone who wants to come in off of Sherbrooke Street to see our collections has a lot of miles to cover in a way to get up to us. We started this grant Play On in 2020, and you might remember that something else happened in 2020, which derailed a lot of our plans for this investigation of play. What we did was, like so many people, we changed our plans. We experimented with new things. We changed from having in-person workshops to virtual workshops. We changed from in-person clue sessions to create a clue game to a virtual clue development workshop. And, of course, we dove into the world of game development. We made digital games. One of the things that we really wanted to do with this was break down the barriers between people in the collections and let people see that they really are for everyone. And this investigation of play really did include a lot of different facets towards that end. We made a podcast, which you could play quite literally wherever you were. We made a pop-up book. I actually have a copy of Amaze right here. And kudos to Greg, who's in the room today for a job very well done on creating an interactive alphabet book that really showcases the collections in a completely unique way. We also held interactive workshops, virtual events, exhibitions, and this interest launched a tangential but related project investigating riddles and riddling culture, led once again by Natalie Cook, which informed an exhibition that was on in the lobby for much of last year, and actually launched another interest in ciphers and coded communication. And there's an exhibition in the lobby currently if you want to explore that topic. One of the concrete ways that we've tried to bring collections beyond our walls is through the digital games. We have 4 games as of today, and we learned a lot throughout this process. And one of the things that we learned is that game players do not like to read instructions. So we learned to make our game play more intuitive. As librarians, we tend to like writing instructions, but we learned to maintain a balance between challenge and reward in the games, and we learned that creative game development teams really need a combination of skills and attitudes and ways of working as well. So although the pandemic really did change the appearance and deliverables of both of our project and the grant itself, the spirit of play sparked the creation of games and an extensive series of virtual workshops. You can see on screen here images from all of the games that we've created so far. The first of them, as I mentioned, was called Raising Spirits, and Amy Redpath-Roddick served as a central figure in that game. It was broken into 2 parts, and it was a long-form narrative escape room game. Why, yes, it was fun, it was interactive, and it was a way for players to learn about campus and its history and library collections remotely. It gave staff as well, who otherwise might have been very frustrated during COVID lockdowns, a challenging project with a really energizing team dynamic. And it had the potential to reach the incoming freshman students for orientation as well. It gave them a view of campus without actually having to be here. And it also, as they solved puzzles throughout this escape room, gave them an introduction to a lot of library resources as well. So we actually, in the second part of this game, we created librarian guides in the form of cards that were hidden in the library spaces that players could explore. And here's the first appearance of cards. We now have a different model in this game that we're celebrating today, Moments in Time. This model, we gave librarian guides in the game the same role that we serve in real life, and that you could approach them to find information to help you on your journey as you were looking for a book or a lost object or trying to solve a puzzle in the game world. But in reality, we serve the same purpose, and I guess my colleagues and I proved the stereotype in that they were a little bit shy and tended to hide behind a book rather than show their faces, or perhaps a plague mask. In the case of Mary Earle, who is the Osler librarian of the history of medicine collection. Lost my train of thought, sorry. But all of my colleagues started to play a role in these games as well, in the development and finding resources for them. And all of these games really did let us dig into our collections and our archives to find stories and people from the past alumni and from the collections in general. By the time we got to our third game, Quiz That So, we had a little bit more time and access to the collections. So we dug for stories that were harder to find and less well known. So we, for instance, you see on screen here the cards from Quiz That So, who were your trivia team members if you play through the game. One of whom was the 1949 Carnival Queen here at McGill. You see second from the right on the bottom. Her name was Beryl Dickinson Dash. And while 1949 was quite a long time ago, we actually spoke with her last year. We got to interview her for the podcast that we created, and she consented also to be part of the game as well. What this did was bring some of our collections and stories to life, quite literally. We met the people behind the documents. The characters for all of these games were drawn from different fields of study, different decades, and even centuries, and they were brought together in a collaborative gameplay environment. Much like all of the things in Moments in Time. So, with that context in mind of the larger play grant that informed the creation of this game, we come to today and we see how play shaped our perspective, and the impact of this play initiative on our outreach activities during the pandemic really can't be overstated. At a time when COVID closure forced remote delivery, we found that play was just the right approach to encourage community engagement and community building under difficult circumstances. Our community engagement and events have grown significantly, particularly in the virtual realm. It's been fun. And now the effort is to reignite the in-person events, and it's a pleasure to have all of you here who are in the room. I confess, I looked at the RSVP list for today's event with wonder at how many people are curious and engaged and interested in the events and collections that we have here at the library. So thank you to all of you for your time and your curiosity and your interest. And thank you for coming to listen and launch Moments in Time with us. Before I let Sam Pappas take over, I want to trumpet a couple of thank yous, very important thank yous. First, as I mentioned, to Natalie Cook, the PI on our SSHRC grant and Associate Dean, who now is actually on sabbatical in a faraway land. Thank you for the support and leadership, and for being willing to take a risk on play at the library, and for being a champion through and through of ROAAr and ROAAr collections. Thanks to Greg Houston, whose support in digitization and design helped us craft a polished and beautiful game for all of you to enjoy. And thanks, of course, to the invisible horde of shepherds that I mentioned earlier. Every card in this deck, there are 52 of them, is illustrated with at least one object from the collections. An item, a book, an artifact, a painting. There is a recto and a verso to each card, and they are not always the same. Sometimes we use the same image on the front and back as a detail, and sometimes it's two separate images. So they're looking at about 100 or more images that had to be sourced from our collections, that had to be researched, found on the stacks, pulled, and digitized to make the game what it is. So an enormous chorus of thank yous to all of my colleagues in Archives, Osler, Visual Arts, and Rare Books. Thank you for your time in helping us put this together and getting it, as I said, across the finish line. And now I'm going to introduce Sam Pappas. Sam works with us, doing research and helping to get the stories that are on the back of each moment in time into a shape where it could be shared and put onto a card, which is no small task, even though it is a small space. So I will let Sam talk about that. Come on up.
Hello, just wanted to make sure that everyone can hear me okay. I tend to have a loud voice, so I'm less worried about the projection. So thank you, Jacquelyn, for the introduction, and thank you for the pretext on play. I think that I was mainly invited to join this game because I came into the interview and I was like, yeah, I love Trivial Pursuit. I love card games. And it's true because a lot of the... All good. Okay. So a lot of the inspiration behind this game came from, of course, the existing game timeline, which is a very similar concept in terms of you are ranking different events chronologically in time. And as well, we brought in Trivial Pursuits, which kind of brought us in this background of bottom up versus top down research. So we liked to combine both the research that is interesting for everyone. We wanted to get the questions that were unexpected for everyone, but still kind of possible to figure out. Didn't want to ask for like, when was the third monarch of Great Britain born? Because I don't think most of us would have that answer. So instead, we wanted to go for questions that were playable and that were well known while also having a bit of a Montreal and the Canada focus. So we developed a list of questions after coming up with these 7 categories, which were the main categories that we came up with the questions in without marrying ourselves to the amount of cards in each category. Instead, we intended it to be very natural, whatever happens, happens, but while keeping in mind these different domains that we wanted to pull from, because we did want to ensure that there was this element of inclusivity, of internationality, even if we came from it from our specific location and our specific focus. So the first picture that I show on this screen is of the movable type invention. This is just one of the many cards that all good. Okay, so this is one of the many cards that came from the more bottom-up approach, where we have this beautiful printing press in the McGill archives. We have a unique object that was painstakingly remade out of broken parts that were found in a broke down building. That is a true story for this Colombian press. So that's something that we really wanted to share with the general audience. But then it also allows us to bring in this other perspective, because most people, when you ask when it was the printing press invented, they will think of Johannes Gutenberg, they will think 15th century, but that is actually not the case. In fact, the inventor of movable type is a Chinese man known as Bi Sheng from the 11th century of the current era. And so we wanted to use this kind of Colombian press. It's a very Western invention, but also show that we are looking at these Western accounts of invention and these Western accounts of looking at the world, but not taking things at face value and looking more deeply into our research and ensuring that we're paying respect to the lesser told histories as well. So we tried to, as Jacquelyn said, account for these interdisciplinary domains. I best exemplify this through our card on Sanskrit manuscripts. This was one of our first questions that we came up with as an interesting item in our collection. We have many different Indic manuscripts, different Sanskrit manuscripts that are beautiful, which would translate well into a card game, one would imagine, and which have such a rich history. However, we wanted to ensure that we could tell the full story with these cards. And this card in particular was difficult because not many people today can read Sanskrit. And a lot of these histories are not super well known. So we had this one text over here on the left. The Stotra is another Sanskrit religious text. It is known as Indic Manuscript 37 because it is a well-known and well-studied artifact. However, the stories within it are less popular compared to other works, and the manuscript is hard to date. It made it difficult to incorporate it into our overall game design. Whereas I spoke with me and Jacquelyn. We spoke with a professor in the religious studies department at McGill, Professor Hamza Stainton, who consulted the different Sanskrit texts and other related texts in the McGill archives that we would be able to use instead. And we reworked this card, which was originally about the stotras themselves, which are basically Sanskrit hymns and songs of praise. And instead, we turned it into a question on the Gita, the Bhagavad Gita, which is a very famous script. It is one of the best known scriptures of Hinduism. And it also has beautiful imagery. It has beautiful text, and the story is one that we were able to point down, and we were able to recognize and increase the actual accuracy of the text, which was very important to us. So there were some cards that got lost in this process, as I pitched to in the previous slide with the Stotras card. One of our favorite cards that we sadly had to let go was the invention of the pregnancy test. This is an artifact that we have in Osler's uncatalogued artifacts collection. However, unfortunately, we were not able to get the copyright permissions to share this in our game. It was just very difficult to get in contact with the owner company, who I will not name. So a lot of the cards that we ran into this issue with, the reason for the difficulties was copyrights. So in this case, we wanted to keep the nature of the object, the energy behind it, while still publishing a card we're allowed to publish. So we ended up conversing with Johnson & Johnson, and we got the permission to share these Ortho-1 birth control, which is one of the first forms of birth control, a life-size replica on a label pin, in case you ever wanted to have a birth control label pin. You can. So that was, yeah, maybe not anymore, but you could have at some point. We really wanted to find these kind of interesting questions that just made people want to know where they would go and find these creative answers, even when we weren't able to answer the questions that we wanted to ask. So for this next part, I'm just going to talk about the history behind some of my favorite cards. I'd say that this one is a bit of a crowd favorite. I know that a lot of the people involved with the game really love the J. It's a beautiful J, I will say, as one of the people who picked it. But this question actually originated out of my initial research question was, when was the English language basically formalized? But that's a bit more of a convoluted question, and that moved into when was the most recent letter introduced to the alphabets, and then that ended up being J. So now our final card, the letter J, is introduced. So on this card, we took two images from this very beautiful type book called Cliché et Gravure. Sorry for my French, by the Fonderie Deverny et Peignot. And this is it's a type book. It has very different images that one would purchase for typing if you were in that business. And they had very different fonts that were very gorgeous and ornamental that we wanted to incorporate into the game. So then we did. Absolutely.
Before they had J, what symbol did they use for language?
It actually originated from an ornamental version of the letter I. So it didn't have that G sound, but the I. And then I guess somehow along the way it did transfer its sounds, but I don't have the answer.
There was no J.
I guess it would be just the G and a vowel.
I see.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Anytime. I don't have the answer to every question.
Nobody does.
No. So another card that was very important to us is this card, including Isaac Newton, the Isaac Newton. His Optics, the treatise on the reflections, refractions, inflections, and colors of light, which is a mouthful of a title, but it is a absolutely seminal work. And the Osler, well, ROAAR has two different copies of this book, one of which is in the Rare Books collection, and one of which is in the Osler collection. But the Rare Books collection is actually purchased directly through a linealogy of different purchasers from Isaac Newton himself, and contains his actual handwritten notes on the manuscript. So this is a remarkable piece, and it was very difficult to find even one page to put on the card, because there's so many annotations he wrote, corrections he made to his own text, which makes this copy very special. And it's something that we wanted to highlight and show everyone that we have that, because it's very impressive. And this is also known as McGill Manuscript 46 because it's quite the piece. And then my final favorite, this is, I guess, one of our replacement cards. It came up a bit later in the process because I believe it was a replacement to our card on the Halifax explosion, where we wanted to use a specific picture of a book cover that was unfortunately copyright. So we were coming up with different Canadian themed questions for this. And in the end, we settled on Franklin's Lost Expedition's departure. And it is important to specify departure because it is a long journey that never ended. So we found two different pictures. The other two cards that I've shown so far actually use the same piece on both the front and the back, but this one we have on the front a page from the Child's Colored Juvenile Picture and Reading Book, which is a little chapbook for children. It has, I believe, 9 different woodcuts, maybe more, that have all been hand colored. And one of the pages, it's just different histories and different famous stories and famous historians that appear throughout this book, but in a very whimsical journey. And this one page is about a search for Sir John Franklin and his crew in the North Seas, where it is also very cold that the sea becomes frozen. And then on the back, we have instead this very beautiful piece, which is from a book by Captain John Franklin, the narrative of a journey to the shores of the Polar Sea in the years 1819, 1820, 1821, and 1822, which was published the next year in 1823. This is a collection of his different logs from that journey and his different thoughts from that journey. And clearly this was from his previous trip to the Arctic seas in 20 years prior to the more fateful trip. But this just showed very different aspects of the collection that are both, I think, beautiful on the card and beautiful imagery, and explored the same topic, though, in very different ways. So that is all for me. And I'm going to pass it to Bianca, who is in control of the design of the cards. Thank you.
So much for your little background. Yeah, I have a very soft-spoken voice, so I'm having a little bit of trouble today projecting, but I'll try my best. Thank you everyone for attending. I'm delighted to finally launch this project because I've been working on it as long as everybody else since the beginning of last year, I'm sure. And I think the process started a bit before that as well. Before that, I am a second-year undergraduate student in art history, so love art, love everything art. This project really appealed to me because all the photos in the collection are very beautiful, and I just really enjoyed that process. Previously, in relation to games, I was also working on a project with Natalie Cook, developing a game for our riddle exhibition that's going on right now in the library. So I do have like that kind of experience working on games. And when I was onboarded, again, January 2022, this game still didn't have a name. We're also picking out some items as well. And yeah, I'll start with what we originally had. We made like a design brief that had all the needs for the cards, down to the color scheme, which you'll note later as I go through some pictures, changed drastically from the first and the final product, and some smaller details like the font size on the cards, which font we were supposed to use. On the screen, the brief was actually much longer, but these are just some of the notes. Some basic elements that we first had to start out with, of course, the font, the color palette. The university actually has its own unique typeface for both serif and sans serif, and they've been designed to use interchangeably. This information is in the McGill like visual identity guide, so we did have to kind of adhere to it a little bit since we're making a product for the university. But as we took some creative, especially with the color palette, even though there is a requirement to use the McGill red somewhere in the design, we ended up incorporating it into the box more so than in the cards. So I made some first drafts around the middle of February. It was preliminary ideas. We had a big meeting about it, just choosing what we'd like. You'll notice that the first design is like the one that's most similar to the cards that we have today. And then the second one's more of like a variation on that theme. Third one straying a bit farther, and then the fourth one was like way out of the box. We were just trying to find a balance between like how many elements we wanted on the card, what if we were going for a more antique or a more modern look, because the project is revolving around archival items. We did decide that the more kind of Victorian decor, I guess, would fit with the items more, and it gave it that air of like authenticity. And the modern look all the way on the right, which is very rough, if you want to excuse the look of it, it would kind of clash, even though we do have some items were from the more modern era. These are some samples of the back designs that were also from that preliminary meeting. They're all pretty similar. Again, just like that balance between the more complicated motifs and the more simple ones, how big the image was going to be. All of these little details like really matter when we're taking it to the printing press. And I also just wanted to show a comparison between the first and the last images that we ended up with, or the last designs. As you can notice with the first one, the biggest difference would be the level of detail. In designing, I tend to want to add a lot of things just because I really enjoy like something that's you zoom in and you keep seeing more, but obviously with the printing process, we lose like a lot of the quality after we send it off. For example, the clocks on the bottom corners of the first design would have totally been lost considering the scale of the cards once it was sent out for printing. And the border also has a bit too much detail that wouldn't necessarily translate once we wanted to put the product out for sale. So we opted just for a simple hourglass at the top of the card and a contrasting color for the bottom circles. Even though those elements are still there, they've just been more simplified. Another fun fact is that there are 4 different color backgrounds for the cards, which are green, yellow, blue, and purple. I picked my sweater out today, actually, because I wanted to emulate it, like the moments in time, kind of, for anyone who can't see. It's close enough. It's almost like Hogwarts colors, but again, just not exactly. We were originally thinking of assigning a background to each collection. So like the Osler collection have maybe all the cards would be blue, but the distribution of the objects wasn't exactly even. So then we just went with randomly assigning the color backgrounds just to bring like a pop of color to the collection. And these colors are also present on the box design once we get to that part. This is a comparison of the back of the cards. The major difference, probably the background. We originally had this like brown color because it would match the wraparound that was on the front of the card. But once we started looking at the whole thing, it kind of really exuded like this dull energy. So we wanted something that had more exciting, like a bright feeling, and just to really match that energy of play at the library. So we did go for the green, which is also present on the front of the cards. And the images are a lot smaller because due to the research process, we actually had a lot of descriptions for the cards that came out a lot longer than were anticipated. So we had to accommodate for that as well. Onto the logo. When we finally came up with a name for the game, it was time to design something that really captured what the game was going for. So the obvious motifs are hourglasses, clocks, arrows, lines, all those kinds of things. I take to drawing them like on paper right off the bat. And we had, I think I ended up with 4 designs, which are on the next slide, that we had to choose between. It was another big meeting, as similar to the meeting about the name. It's mostly a trial and error process. And yeah, I think the ones on the left there are the 4 that we came out with. And you'll notice that the second one from the top is the idea that we went with, and it was just tweaked a little bit more, and it's simplified a little bit more in the final product. At the same time, because we finally had a name, we had to start thinking about what the box was going to look like, because all the card designs are pretty much finalized. Those are just a few sketches there. Again, I was really going for the hourglass idea, but that necessarily doesn't really come out in the final box design. And then Jacquelyn also had a great idea about including mini versions of the cards on the box, just to give the players an idea about what the game looks like on the inside. And this eventually became the main focal point. So we ditched the hourglass in the final design. So this is when we kind of shifted into that second phase of the box design, replacing the hourglass and also having the logo included. These were just some colorways. And then there's also those little informations on the top, just telling you about the amount of players, the game time, what the age appropriateness is for the game, which is, I think, 8 and above, or I don't know, anybody can play the game now. Yeah, and we have this brown again, which, as you will see, we do get rid of eventually. This is my box design composite sketch, kind of just placing all of the needs of the design onto paper, just to see where we wanted those things. There's like the barcode on the bottom. There's space for copyright information or selling information, McGill logo, little blurb about the game, just to get people interested. If they pick it up at the library and want to see, what is this about? Then they can read that from the back. And when this is digitized, it looked like this, just very plainly, because we didn't have any text yet for the back, and we're also working on it. And finally, it does end up looking like this, which is a lot different from the first design, because I did want to have the actual images from the cards on the side of the box. But then that proved to be a little hectic for what we were going for. And as you can see, we have those 4 color lines. We've got the cards, all the game information, the library logo, and our little blurb. You know when the letter J was invented and when was margarine invented. The brown was scrapped, like on the back of the cards, because it seemed a bit too serious for me, and the whole project about serious play was just towing that line between what games are for children and what games are for adults, and what appeals to both kind of categories of people, and how we can kind of communicate that through the artistic choices that were made. And the last thing that I worked on for the project is this little instruction booklet, which is included in every box of cards. I think the most fun part was just making these little like motifs of the cards. I think they're so cute. And I also wrote a note here that says, I thank Jacquelyn for compressing the instructions down as much as she could, so I could fit some really nice diagrams on there. It was a bit of a struggle trying to figure out how to communicate how to play the game with just like these little figures, because it's definitely something that you kind of pick up as you go along. But yeah, and on the last page of the instruction cards, we have a little QR code that takes us to the website and some credits about the game as well. And that leads us to the final product, which is here today. I had a great experience working on it. And obviously there's a lot more sketches behind the scenes. There's pages and pages of notebooks at home that are just, oh, we should shift this image over a little bit. We should replace this one actually, or change the background for this image because it kind of clashes the colors and things. But that's like a very condensed version of all of the stuff that I worked on for the project. And I think there's another page. Oh, never mind. Yeah, I also wanted to thank, I left a note here as well, Greg Houston, for helping me with some of the designs for the box specifically. because we had a little field trip as well to like a card game store just to figure out what other people were putting on their games, because we've never done anything like this before. So that advice was really appreciated. And I think Jacquelyn will take over again and we'll play a little bit of a game with the final product.
Yeah. Chris is coming up.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Just want to say thank you very much, everyone who is everyone who is here or watching from home or remotely. That's been really fun. Those of you who are here, you can see some fun things here that we have, which are paper games. Also, Yves Lapointe's lapel is also a quiz as well. And you got to say which came first and what's on his lapel. He very cleverly set himself up for this. And you can see an example, I think, of one of the lapel pins. That was wonderful. I want to thank, of course, our funders, Shirk, for giving the funding for the whole series. As you heard, a lot of really interesting things came out of it, and some students got to do some really clever and creative things. My colleagues, as usual, never fail to impress me with their dedication, their creativity, and Jacquelyn with your ideas, which we heard all about. And you know, this is a lot of fun, and the game is available, as you heard, amongst with some other things here on the 4th floor in our mini boutique, but also at Le James. And you also can have a lot of fun playing with real rare books and archives and other things as well, which you're also welcome to do. And you have a selection here, which if you're in the room, do have take a moment to have fun. Anyway, thank you all so much, and we'll see you at our next event.
I will put a link in the chat for those on Zoom to the listing of the game on the Le James website. And you can purchase it from them online, or you can come in person. It costs $21.99. And it really is beautiful. So for you in the room, come up and have a look. We have some games and items from the collections here just to show that we actually do have a lot of other games. And there's one deck of cards made by the university, came out of the University of Manitoba, that shows that we are not alone in making card games. So come and enjoy. There's also a display of things in the reading room cases that are featured on the card. So if you're here in person, do come and have a look. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you.